Thank you, Speaker. I move that, in the opinion of this House, the Government of Ontario should take action to keep our roads and communities safe by increasing penalties for stunt driving and other dangerous offences under the Highway Traffic Act.
Good bill.
Ms. Tangri has moved private member's notice of motion number 138. Pursuant to Standing Order 101, the member has 12 minutes for her presentation. I turn to the member from Mississauga-Streetsville.
Thank you and good morning, Speaker. It is my honour to rise in the Legislature for the first time in 2021 and lead off the debate of my second private member's motion of my parliamentary calendar. While responding to the health and economic impacts of COVID-19 have always been and will continue to be the government's top priority throughout this pandemic and recovery to come, it is very important that all aspects of legislative business continue, especially private members' business. Before I begin, I would like to thank the Government House Leader for bringing forward the standing order changes in the fall that allowed us to be here this morning and consider an extra piece of private members' business each week to catch up from the impacts that COVID-19 had on our last spring session. As we all know, we normally would not be here at this time talking about PMBs. While the pandemic has brought direct impacts to each and every one of us here in Ontario and around the world, there are other, more indirect impacts the pandemic has had as well. One of those indirect impacts has been on our roads and highways. The people of Ontario have been doing their part throughout the pandemic by staying home and limiting their travels to essential trips only. The businesses of Ontario have adapted their practices and allowed employees to work from home, which has led to a drastic decrease in the number of people who commute to and from work. Naturally, this has led to a marked decrease in road users and traffic volumes. Traffic is lighter, which is something I'm sure most road users appreciate. But there are people taking advantage of this change by acting irresponsibly and downright dangerous. Last May, we were all shocked to hear of an 18-year-old charged with travelling 308 kilometres per hour on the Queen Elizabeth Way west of Toronto. As Sergeant Kerry Schmidt of the Ontario Provincial Police explained at the time, that's 191 miles an hour, or 280 feet per second. Any driver up ahead would not even be able to see this person coming up behind them. A driver could check their mirror and begin to change lanes, and without notice, this vehicle could be racing past them or into them. Words cannot begin to describe how utterly reckless, dangerous and callous this behaviour is, and members of the public agree. This particular incident has started a conversation about the dangerous behaviour people were exhibiting on the roads. But this driver isn't the only one we've seen acting this way. While not all charges are as egregious, we are seeing an extremely concerning increasing trend as bad actors have been treating empty roads and highways as their personal racetracks, driving at ludicrous speeds without care and regard for others. It was pure luck that in this case nobody was injured or killed. But this is not always the reality. Speeding and aggressive driving are the #1 cause of driving-related fatalities, and these deaths are preventable. Last year, Peel Regional Police, responsible for my community of Mississauga, laid 827 stunt driving charges in 2020 versus 366 charges in 2019 and 375 the year before. The change between 2019 and 2020 is a 125% increase. In Toronto, as of mid-September, 714 stunt-related driving charges were laid, up from 332 in the same period a year before, another 215% increase. In Waterloo, 285 drivers were charged with stunt driving last year compared to 143 the year before. This is a 98% increase, and the numbers across the province paint a clear picture that this is a growing problem. As of October, high-speed collisions across the province rose by 186% compared to the previous year. These collisions are tragic and have real impacts on real people. Innocent people are at risk of serious injury or losing their lives as a result of this reckless, callous and irresponsible behaviour. Enforcement's not the issue here, Speaker. Many members know I have a great deal of respect for our police, and I have an especially good relationship with my local chief in police, Chief Nish Durayappa. The increase in charges means the officers are keeping up. We're also seeing operations spanning multiple jurisdictions, targeting rallies, gatherings and other events that promote unlawful and dangerous behaviour. Project Drift, a collaboration between the OPP, York Regional Police and Peel Police, is a prime example and yielded good results. Section 172 of the Highway Traffic Act prohibits racing and stunting. The actions that define these terms are currently outlined in regulation. A few of these are, as they relate specifically to stunt driving, are brake checking, driving without being in the driver's seat, going 50 kilometres per hour or greater over the speed limit, or travelling at above 150 kilometres per hour, which was a section our government introduced in 2019. The majority of charges laid are for speeds 50 and over, and it is these types of actions that cause the greatest risk and devastation. While excessive speeds we should never be travelling certainly grab our attention, 160, 228, 250 or 308 kilometres per hour, for example, stunt driving is not limited to freeways or expressways. Just this month, 3 drivers in Oakville were charged travelling at 129 kilometres per hour in a 60 zone. Last June, police in Burlington charged a driver with travelling 156 in a 60-kilometre zone, nearly 100 kilometres per hour over the posted limit. In 2018, around the time I moved into my constituency office in Streetsville, a driver up the street from us on Britannia Road was caught 142 kilometres per hour in a 50 zone, nearly 3 times the speed limit. And last August, a stunt driving charge was laid against a driver travelling 119 in a 60 zone, nearly twice the limit, also on Britannia Road. And this was not the driver's first stunt driving charge, nor was it his second. It was his third in 5 months. These individuals are acting with no regard to the people and communities around them. These actions are taking place on our local streets, near homes, libraries, parks and schools. Every time the police stop a driver acting this dangerously, they are saving people's lives. And every time a driver acts this dangerously, they are putting other people's lives at risk. When collisions don't occur, it is out of sheer luck, nothing else. There are 2 factors, I believe, that need to be addressed. First, the current penalties for stunt driving, at least at the roadside, are not a strong enough deterrent. The current roadside penalty for stunt driving is a 7-day licence suspension and a 7-day vehicle impoundment, which is, of course, at the owner's expense. The current roadside penalty for impaired driving is a 90-day licence suspension and a 7-day vehicle impoundment. To be clear, driving while impaired by drugs or alcohol is absolutely unacceptable and poses a great danger to other road users and members of communities right across the province. But so is stunting and racing. There is no valid reason for anybody to be stunting, and the act of doing so, while a mistake in retrospect for most, is deliberate. We need to prevent this behaviour from happening in the first place and keep our road users safe. And while the courts should and must have to convict individuals before full penalties allowed under statute, such as fines or imprisonment, can be applied, administrative or roadside penalties immediately reduce risks these drivers pose on our highways and further deter individuals from committing the offence. The government should consult with stakeholders and others across the province to determine what an appropriate roadside penalty, both in terms of licence suspensions and vehicle impoundments, should look like. Additionally, escalating penalties increasing with each time the offence was committed should be taken into consideration to prevent repeat offences from occurring. The other factor that needs to be addressed specifically relates to younger drivers. Like many other things, the habits we develop when we are young stick with us throughout the rest of our lives. We must make sure that our youth develop good driving habits that keep them safe and all road users safe. We have zero tolerance for novice drivers with a G1 or G2 licence under our graduated licensing program, or anyone 21 years of age or younger driving under the influence of drugs or alcohol, because we know the lack of driving experience poses additional risks. It's reflected in many of the reports of charges we see in the media. It's reflected in the fatalities and injuries that are a result of these preventable collisions. And coming from the insurance world, it is definitely reflected in the insurance premiums in that age group. As the Honourable Minister and Associate Minister of Transportation stated during National Teen Driver Safety Week in October, road crashes are the second leading cause of death among young people in Canada. It's a tragedy when someone loses a life on our roads, and these deaths are completely avoidable. We need to educate our young drivers and make them aware of the responsibilities they have as operators of motor vehicles. We also need to make them aware of the serious risks they pose to themselves and others when they behave irresponsibly, and ensure they are aware of the penalties they face for doing so. This charge and the reckless behaviour associated with it is not something to be proud of. It is something you should deeply, deeply regret. While it is true that Ontario has some of the toughest penalties in North America when it comes to street racing and stunt driving, the dangerous trend we have seen means that we have more work to do. This is not an easy issue, and the correct response and the correct policies won't be immediate. The government needs to work with stakeholders and find the right policies to implement. They are willing to offer solutions, and they are willing to work with the government to get them in place. We need to get this right. Throughout my consultations on this motion, both in my community and with organizations and other groups, everybody agreed that this issue is of growing concern, and everybody agreed that we need to take action. I hope that this motion is the start of an ongoing conversation on how we can best protect the individuals and families that use Ontario's highways. And I look forward to hearing from my colleagues and the opposition members. Thank you very much, Speaker.
Well done.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and I really do want to thank each of the members from Peterborough, Kawartha, Perth Wellington, Carlson, Orleans, Oshawa and Sudbury for speaking to this motion. And we heard loud and clear during my talking to many stakeholders about the term stunt driving, how it perhaps is something that many strive to obtain, which doesn't serve the purpose at all. We need to make sure we find some kind of a terminology, perhaps not what we've heard today, but I'd like to work with a lot of the others to find some specific terminology that would work in being more of a deterrent. I certainly do look forward to working with all the stakeholders in the Ministry of Transportation and the Attorney General to work with and changing the Highway Traffic Act to make sure that penalties are increased, because a 7-day licence suspension, 7-day vehicle impoundment is not by any means a deterrent at all. Just last week I held a safety town hall with our Mississauga Fire, with Staff Sergeant from the Peel Police, Chief of Paramedics, and the Peel Public Health Chief, Dr. Lowe, on safety, and stunt driving came up quite often, and all agree that further action needs to be taken to deter. It's not always after the fact. We need to make people understand, especially our young drivers, that stunt driving does kill, and unfortunately for them, many of them themselves have been killed whilst they're stunt driving, or the spectators around them. So we really want to strive and have more efforts, and I do want to thank everyone for speaking to this bill and their support, and I look forward to working with everyone to making sure we have a positive resolution. Thank you very much, Speaker.